Greetings and welcome to Eye Care Leadership Live. My name is Mike Lyons, and my guests today are Jackie Waterhouse and Ashley Hennis from Codex IT, and we're going to be talking about MIPS. MIPS is, as you know, an incredibly important topic, and these two ladies have a ton of expertise there. So take a listen, and I'm sure that you will be getting some tips to help you with your MIPS program. My guests today are Jackie Waterhouse and Ashley Hennis from Codex IT. Welcome.
Welcome. Thanks, Mike.
Ooh, we're getting the hearts from Jackie. I love that.
Yes.
Ooh, I did it too. Great. Well, welcome everybody. Welcome Jackie and Ashley. Thanks for joining. We're here to talk about MIPS. Y'all know something about MIPS from what I understand.
A little bit.
A little bit about MIPS. Now, I don't know a whole lot about MIPS. Actually, almost everything I know I learned from y'all the other day when we talked. But MIPS is really important, and so we're going to get into that. But maybe before we get started, would y'all mind telling me a little bit about what you do and how did you get into MIPS? So, Jackie, why don't you kick us off with that?
Thank you. I have been in ophthalmology for a long time. Yes. And that meant managing clinics, helping clinicians with their workflows, training technicians, all of the above. I pivoted my career in 2022 to get into compliance and work in the MIPS program. And what we do now is we help practices, large, small, all practices, different specialties, navigate the world of MIPS and help them get through their performance year successfully with a great submission. And that's what we do.
Okay. Ashley.
Yeah, similar to Jackie, I worked in ophthalmology. I worked in ophthalmology for about 15 years prior to becoming more in the compliance world in 2021. So I was a COA and a clinic manager. And then, like I said, transitioned to MIPS fully in 2021. And same thing as Jackie, really focus on helping practices simplify MIPS and stay compliant. And we like what we do.
Okay. Exciting. Well, y'all are definitely pros when it comes to MIPS. And I'm guessing a lot of the people listening know exactly what MIPS is all about. I guarantee they know probably, but for anyone who might be listening who is like, what in the heck is MIPS? What does it stand for? Why is it important? Can you give me the short answer of what that is? Jackie, why don't you take that one maybe? And then Ashley, if you want to jump in.
So MIPS is a program that is run by CMS, and it is a Medicare program. So it's for clinicians who bill Medicare. And it really makes clinicians focus on the quality of care as opposed to the quantity of their care in terms of how many patients that they see. So clinicians are scored in different categories throughout a performance year, and their Medicare reimbursements are very much geared and towards how they score in those categories.
Okay, so that's pretty important, right? So like how much money you make is going to depend on your MIPS reporting.
Very important.
Yes.
And from what I understand, physicians usually are interested in how much money they take in, right? Is that kind of important?
That's probably
something they care about. Okay.
Second to their patient care. Yes, that's probably second on their list.
Patient care and making money. That's absolutely vital. Okay. Well, so, when it comes to MIPS, there's probably some things that you can do right. There's some things that you can kind of maybe not do right, or maybe not do as well as you could. And so what are, let's talk about some of those tips, MIPS tips, that people could understand. So what are some mistakes maybe that people make? Like what is one thing that you commonly see practices not doing correctly or just not doing?
Yeah, so I think that one of the biggest struggles for practices is one, kind of making a game plan and really structuring a year, not centered around MIPS, but kind of having, touch points that they're making sure that they're keeping up with the changing rules. Every year, CMS changes the program, even if it's just slightly. Some years there's more changes than others. And then staying on top of scoring and not getting to the end of the year and kind of feeling like they have to rush or that they didn't do something in a timely manner. So I think staying on top of that is sometimes difficult for practices.
Sure. That's really, yeah. Some of the common mistakes too practices make is they're not really aware of what their requirements are within the MIPS program. The program is very nuanced. So depending upon your practice size, geography, things like that, your requirements are very specific to your practice. So mistakes can happen when practices are not educated to understand what they're required to do. And then CMS comes back and says, you didn't submit the data in this category, or you submitted the wrong data and things like that. And that can really get practices in trouble with their reimbursements. So
you talked about changes in the program. What's an example of a change that has happened that maybe threw some people off? They didn't realize it changed. Can you give an example?
Yeah. So maybe an example would be a quality measure that maybe you've focused on for several years, you scored really well on, you count on that quality measure as something that really helps your score. And then maybe there was a significant change where either that measure was removed from the program, because that does happen as measures get topped out, they get removed. Or perhaps the benchmark changed for that measure, and which means that maybe your score, your percentage that you score in that measure doesn't equate to as high of a point value in that measure. So that can be a big, especially if practices don't, maybe they're just counting on that and they get to the end of the year and realize, wait a second, this was a big change that we didn't realize. So I think measure changes can really impact practices.
Yep, and practice level changes also can heavily impact practices. You have the performance year that's 12 months, and generally in November, CMS will release new practice information, whether it's practice statuses, where they're located, their geography, again, is very important, how big the practice is. And sometimes the practice status can change from a small practice to a large practice. And they have to submit different data based on that. And if they are not aware that they have to be very mindful of the CMS updates, then they go into the next performance year, thinking that they're doing what they're supposed to do. But in fact, what they need to do has changed as of December of the prior year. So that's an important thing.
Okay, so there could be some moving targets, I guess, to some extent.
Definitely, yes.
That's always fun.
CMS keeps us on our toes.
Yeah, go ahead, Jackie.
And that's something that Ashley and I, we have a unique situation where we manage practices together. So we are always watching all these different moving targets. It's so we are making sure that practices know exactly where they stand, exactly what they are required to submit. So we take that guesswork out for them and just basically give them very specific items, and it really lessens the burden for the practice. So they don't have to worry about all those details.
Okay. It's always nice to have someone taking the details off your plate. Where can a practice find out what are they supposed to be doing? If things are changing all the time, how do you even know what the rules of the game are exactly for your practice?
Yeah, so CMS, like Jackie mentioned previously, releases a final rule typically in November, December of the year before. And fortunately, they released that. Unfortunately for practices, it's 1,000 pages long. So it is not always easy to go through, but there are other resources available to really kind of pull out the important information that you need. Definitely going to the quality payment program, knowing what your practice is required to report on, and looking at the resources available on that website are really beneficial.
You talked about how practices can be different. You mentioned the size, right? So there could be, size measures can change what you have to track. Are there other differences between clinics that would necessitate different reporting or different information you have to track besides the size?
Yes, there are. Geography matters. Practices that are located in more rural areas or areas where there is not a lot of other clinicians like them, they do get benefits where they may have to submit less data in certain categories. So that's very important to know. If they don't know that they're required to submit a certain amount of data, they can submit insufficient data, and then therefore they would score poorly in that category. I'm speaking specifically of improvement activities, which is one of the 4 categories in the MIPS program. So,
okay. Let's talk about that. So getting a little bit into like what is in MIPS, and again, this is my ignorant, HR guy knowledge. So like, what is an improvement activity? So let's say I'm an ophthalmology clinic, and I'm trying to track my MIPS and stuff, and I have to track my improvement activity. What are some things that could qualify as an improvement activity under MIPS?
So improvement activities, really the focus of that category is improving practice operations. So if you think about it like that, it can encompass a lot of things. Obviously, you can't just pick something and say, that's what we did to improve it. It has to be CMS improvement activities that they've designated. So they can be anything from patient surveys. So that's an example. If a practice sends out patient surveys and they then have to take those surveys, and maybe they're getting a common complaint that, a provider's bedside manner is, that would never happen.
That never happens.
Never happens. But so maybe they go to that clinician and they have a conversation. Or maybe it's something as simple as a wait time on a Tuesday morning, and they're receiving that continuously. So they say, maybe we need to look at our Tuesday morning schedule, and we need to pivot. So that's an example of an improvement activity.
Interesting. So is there's like some person in Washington, D.C. that's like, yeah, that's a pretty good improvement. I like that. I'm going to give them extra points for that. How does that work?
Well, CMS really is trying to improve the process and the operations within the clinic. So that is, I do think and give them credit for putting energy and effort into these improvement activities that do improve processes like language access. We all have struggled within the clinic. Ashley and I obviously worked in the clinic for years, where a patient comes in that has a serious condition and there's a language barrier. So one improvement activities is implementing a language access plan. How do we handle when a patient comes in that is speaking Cambodian or any language? So that's a great one to do. And I really think that there is care so that all patients that come in can be taken care of carefully, and we can improve the process to do that, even if it is patients that are cranky because they're waiting too long on a Tuesday morning, which was a great example,
This show is sponsored by Seasoned Advice HR Services, where I help eye care businesses to make more money and save more money by hiring better, retaining better, and reducing your HR risk. If you would like an HR assessment or ongoing HR support, please reach out to me at seasoned-advice.com. This might be really technical, but like if let's say a clinic is purely ophthalmology and another one is like a mix of ophthalmology and optometry, do you see differences in how those two operations would want to think about their MIPS, or not really so much?
I think most optometrists that we support are really medical optometrists. They're doing routine eye exams. So a lot of those measures fall within the purview of ophthalmology. Ashley, would you agree with that? Or
Yeah, I would definitely agree. Especially typically if it's a mixed practice of ophthalmologists and optometrists, you're going to see a lot of overlap in the measures. They're treating the same type of patients, and maybe doing the follow-up after the surgery that the ophthalmologist performs. So all of it kind of goes hand in hand.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. And what can be even more trickier than optometrist is when you have a practice that has a lot of subspecialties within ophthalmology. And that's really where Ashley and I like to hone in on the quality category and how we can choose and help them choose what measures work best for them based on their specialty.
I see. So like if, let's say if they have a glaucoma doctor and a retina doctor,
Exactly.
there would be different things you might track for those physicians.
Yes. And that's where, again, I hate to keep plugging us as the dynamic duo, but we do give them specific quality measures that say, hey, this will work better for your clinic, rather than them looking at like 18 quality measures. We're like, wait a minute, let's slow it down. Let's choose 10. Let's simplify the process, help you learn how to document that in your EHR. And before you know it, the burden is like, everybody's breathing deep, because it's like, wow, okay, it's not as complicated as we thought it was. Sure. So really, when you're getting into these subspecialties, it can be a little bit more challenging.
Okay, gotcha. I'm wondering, anytime you deal with the government, right? I'm starting to think about taxes, right? So like I did my taxes not that long ago. I like to get it done early in the year, did my taxes. And, there's always this fear or this concern, I'm going to get audited, like they're going to want to look at my records and stuff. Is that common? What does that look like? What tends to trigger, a review? Can you kind of talk about audits, or what I call in the enforcement category of things? How does that work? And is that a big risk that people need to be thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is a risk. Just like doing your taxes, the most important thing is that you know that you did them correctly and that you submitted the correct information, because the point of an audit is to find, just like with your taxes, the point of an audit in MIPS would be to find inaccurate data that was submitted. The thing to remember about the audits that are performed by CMS, they are typically random. So just because you're selected for an audit doesn't mean that you did anything wrong. And it can be, but it's typically not your entire set of data that you submitted. It's typically CMS is trying to make sure that the data that they received for one specific measure or for one specific category was accurate. So they're going to ask for the information related to that measure. They also not only audit practices, but they audit the registries, like the IRIS registry that ophthalmologists use. So they're also auditing the registries. It's really just a way for them to make sure that the data that is being submitted is accurate, because they use that data, because the whole goal of the MIPS program is to improve patient care. So in order to be able to use that data to do that, they have to make sure it's accurate. So that's ultimately the goal.
Gotcha. I really understand with MIPS that your reimbursements from CMS can be affected. I'm curious, is there a benchmark number that you can see, that you have seen, maybe even anecdotally, right? Like, oh, the typical practice has, no impact to their reimbursements because they're doing MIPS great. Or, oh, you know what? The typical practice has like a 2%, deduction off of their Medicare. Is there a number that you can say, hey, if you're below this, then you're probably, below the benchmark. And if you're above this, then you're doing, above the norm? And does that question even make sense?
It does make sense. I'm trying to follow you. I think you're thinking about like the threshold, like a neutral threshold, like you don't pay or you don't get money back. Is that what you're referring to?
And what is normal? Is it normal for a clinic to be dinged on their MIPS on an ongoing basis, or is it normal to just kind of be flat? And what does that normal look like?
There is no normal. The goal is to always be above the net neutral, which is 75 points.
Okay.
The score is from 0 to 100, 100 being perfect, obviously. So the goal is to not, you always want to be in the positive.
Right.
To say that there's an average, no, all practices score differently for various different reasons. Remember, there's 4 categories. Some practices do better in some categories than others. So there is no really standard. The whole goal is to avoid a penalty. And to do that, you just have to really know the 4 categories and do your best to try to do great work within those categories to score high. We want to always avoid a negative adjustment. So
okay, sure. How common are these negative adjustments? Like if I threw a dart at the map and hit a random ophthalmology practice, for example, what percent do you think would have a negative adjustment, you think?
It's hard to say. Like Jackie mentioned, there's so many different mitigating circumstances. And sometimes practices can receive a negative adjustment for a year because they had maybe they had an EHR change or they had something substantial happen within their practice that impacted their score for that year. I would say, though, that not to give a percentage, but to say if you've consistently scored below 75, it really is important that you take a second to kind of reevaluate, because just because you're scoring lower, you may actually be working harder than you need to be, and you may be just treading water and spinning your wheels. So I'd say if you have consistently, if there's a practice out there that has consistently scored below 75, or they feel like they're spending an enormous amount of time on MIPS and they're not really improving their score, that would be a good time to kind of take a minute to reevaluate what you're doing.
For a minute or a week.
Right. Yeah. For those, let's say that there's a practice out there that has been putting a lot of effort and maybe they're getting a negative adjustment. They don't understand. What are some typical things that and I realize every practice may be different, but maybe there's 1 or 2 typical things that you have seen come up multiple times that is often the culprit, or maybe an adjustment that can be often made to help them get over that 75?
Oftentimes, I think it's a workflow issue and they're taking on too much and they're not working the program efficiently. If you look at the totality of what they're doing, Ashley and I would probably take a step back and look at all 4 categories and try to make it efficient, pick measures that work best for them, see, what is the reason. Sometimes if you are in certain specialties, it can be harder to score better, but consistently being under net neutral, we would really have to look at each practice individually and really pick it apart. Ashley, what are your thoughts on that?
No, I definitely agree. I think that MIPS is not, it's not easy. It's not simple, but it can be simplified. And that's where, again, Jackie and I understand the totality of the program. So, and then you understand your practice, we understand the program. And by those 2 coming together, we can kind of really, make it more simple.
Yeah.
Maybe, it's never going to be easy, but we can simplify it for you.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Since we're live on LinkedIn right now, I just want to say if anyone has a question or a comment, let's say if you're a big fan of MIPS, we'd love to hear about it. Or if you have a MIP tip to drop into the comments, we'd love to hear from you. So just make a comment there on LinkedIn. We'll see it and we can address them right here while we're chatting, since we do have 2 experts here with us, and we'd love just to hear from you. With that, I'm wondering, I feel like I've heard things about MIPS, not just changing, but is it going away or is it being de-emphasized? And maybe this is just me, not really paying attention to this topic because it's not really an HR thing. Is MIPS going away? Is it being de-emphasized? Or is it maybe the opposite? Is it getting more important? Tell me what you're seeing trend-wise, with MIPS.
I don't think MIPS is going to go away because that would mean that Medicare would be giving up control of reimbursements. Don't see that happening anytime soon. There are changes, now we focus on traditional MIPS. CMS did release a new program called acronym MVP because we love acronyms, but it really stands for MIPS Value Pathway. And it is a program that is in place now. So it's sort of side by side with traditional MIPS. And the program is set up to be specialty specific. So really I think they're trying to decrease the burden on specialties so that instead of looking at the quality category and seeing 24 measures, the specialty may only see 10 measures. So they can really, I think it's trying to help them kind of simplify the process. So MVP is the way of the future. So right now we have both MIPS traditional and MVP side by side. Ashley and I are both, all of our practices are doing both just to get prepared because traditional MIPS will be phased out at some point, whether it's 2028, 2029, it's going to happen. And then we'll be dealing only with MVP. But I think it will always change. There'll always be little changes to it. But I don't think it's ever going to go away because then how would Medicare be controlling how they reimburse clinicians? So,
yeah. What is the importance, as an HR person, I think about the frontline employees a lot and how we train them and onboard them and educate them. How important is it that your frontline employees understand MIPS, what it is, why it's important? Is that important? Or is it just like, hey, fill this part out in the chart and, we'll be good to go kind of a thing?
No, I think you're right. It's really important. MIPS is a really good opportunity to create teamwork and ownership within the practice. There are, once you create a workflow for a specific measure, including everyone that's a part of that to understand why you're doing it, then there's ownership when you do well that everyone has contributed to that. So I think that it really is actually an opportunity to include everyone and to kind of create that teamwork and that ownership and outcomes.
Yeah, and the front staff is very important for promoting interoperability, which is one of the categories in the MIPS program. They check the patients in, they set them up for the patient portal, they collect all the demographics. And like Ashley said, we are huge on teamwork. When we have client calls, we want them to bring everybody to the call. Bring everybody, whoever you want to bring, so that everybody can understand it. We really believe that when everybody is involved, the outcome works out better. So.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of that. I love that. And because I think when employees understand the goal, whether it's MIPS or whatever, patient satisfaction, they want to see that metric get better. Like, oh, we got a 76. Let's get an 80 next time. Let's get an 85. Because that's fun. I get a sense of satisfaction from knowing that, we're doing a good job. We've talked about the EHR a little bit here. What is the role of the EHR with MIPS? Does it make it easier, harder? What are the things that you have to think about when it comes to EHRs? And then, if you're changing EHR, where does that come into play? And how do you have to think about that with MIPS also? Is that just a huge question?
No, we love that question. It's one of our favorite questions.
Yes.
Yeah. Ashley, do you want to go ahead with that one?
Yes. So, an EHR has an enormous impact on MIPS. So each EHR is going to have a workflow designated for, certain measures. And you have to make sure that that your staff is trained, that your technicians, your scribes, your front desk staff is trained on what they have to do to complete that measure. So that is really important. As well as if you're going to change EHRs, keeping that in mind, is this going to be burdensome to MIPS workflows if we make this change to an EHR? Thinking about how that's going to, obviously an EHR change is always going to be a significant thing for practices, but making sure that you're aware of how it impacts MIPS when you're deciding which EHR to change to. understanding workflows within that EHR and how that's going to affect your staff.
Yeah. And one thing we see, unfortunately, often is a lot of clinicians still on paper charts, which is always very difficult to participate in the program. So that's where I think a lot of the negative adjustments come into play, because clinicians just don't participate even though they're supposed to. But choosing an EHR specific to your specialty is really, really important. We see oftentimes practices will choose an EHR that just doesn't work well with their specialty, which makes reporting very challenging and can create a lot more work for them. So choosing an EHR that works well for your specialty is probably one of the number one things that come to mind for me. So.
Okay. So that's pretty important. I always, kind of coming back to the people issue, because I always think about people and how that affects the results of a clinic. I really believe that employee retention can help you with so many areas of clinical operation. Is that true for MIPS as well? Does staff retention, staff turnover play any role when it comes to MIPS?
Yeah, 100%. I know Jackie and I can probably both attest to being on calls with practices and saying, you were scoring, 90% in this, and now you're at 50%, or this was, and you ask them, like, you know what, we've had a lot of turnover. This is probably a training issue. When there is like turnover within a group within the practice, whether it be front desk or the clinic, it's almost like those things just fall through the cracks. That's why, again, it's important to kind of know the why behind what you're doing, but also that staff retention factor definitely plays in when it comes to MIPS.
Yeah. I think another thing I just wanted to plug that came to mind is really incorporating MIPS into more compliance into the clinic throughout the whole year, not just waiting until Q4 to go, okay, what do we need to do? It's starting now. I mean, it's February. This is like the prime time to get things sort of all in order, get started with documentation, get started with understanding what we need to do for the year. And really that is the key to success. So. Okay.
I guess that I'm going to read between the lines here that there are a lot of clinics that kind of wait till the end and they try to get all their stuff together. Is that a common thing that you see out there, that clinics don't prioritize their MIPS tracking and they really just implement initiatives near the end of the year? You don't have to name names or anything.
No, we won't name names, but let's just say we've gotten some panicky phone calls in November going, oh my God, how can we resurrect this? Right, Ashley?
Yeah. And I think that too, knowing I've worked in a practice, you're dealing with 100 things. You're dealing with, new equipment that's, you're having to have service. You're dealing with patients who are having, that have serious medical conditions, and you're dealing with real life things that sometimes MIPS can fall by the wayside. And it's not because you chose to kind of put it off or you're procrastinating. It really is just a product of you're dealing with a lot. So that's, again, why having a process in place that really breaks it down where you're just touching it, even if it's just a little bit, you have a plan, like in January, we're going to do this. In February, we're going to do this. So that you're not going, oh my gosh, it's been 6 months and we were dealing with this crisis that we completely forgot and now we're way off course.
And I'm guessing it to some extent that is part of what y'all do with the clinics that you work with, is kind of help them lay out a plan for the year and keep them on track. Is that right?
Yeah, we sort of have a MIPS calendar that we keep stored in our head. So that every month there may be one or two small things that at the end of the year, everybody's happy that they did, because it doesn't feel like such a big task when it's done like that. So.
Okay, awesome. Well, we could sit here and talk all day long about MIPS, and I'm sure that everyone listening wishes that we would, but you have to leave you have to leave people wanting more. So this feels like a good place to wrap things up. If anyone listening wants to get in touch with you, wants to learn more about the work that you do with MIPS at Codex IT, what's the best way for someone to track you down?
Well, we're both on LinkedIn, so don't hesitate to reach out to us, send us a message on LinkedIn. We can also give you our email address if you want to reach out to us, whether it be that you want to reach out on LinkedIn and we give it to you there, or it's MIPS at Codex IT is a good way to reach us via email. So that's another option.
Yeah, and I'll stick that information in the show notes for folks that are listening to make it nice and easy. But thank you both for joining the show today. I learned a lot. MIPS is definitely obviously something that's super important, and thanks for sharing your expertise with us here today.
Thanks for having us, Mike.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great.
Well, that brings this episode of Eye Care Leadership Live to a conclusion. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the show on your podcast app and share it with someone who would value the content. I promise to bring you more guests and content to help make you a better eye care clinical leader. I also invite you to subscribe to my HR newsletter for eye care leaders. You can find information about that at seasoned-advice.com. Now go out there and lead with confidence.